I pulled into the familiar driveway of my husband's family home just as the evening light started to fade over Houston. The kind of light that makes suburban streets look charming, deceptively calm, like everything is in place when it's really not. I gripped my purse a little tighter, taking a deep breath before stepping onto the polished porch. Inside, the warmth of the house greeted me, but it felt sterile, almost rehearsed. The smell of roasted chicken and faint perfume lingered in the air, a comforting facade for what I knew would be an uncomfortable night. I reminded myself that I've been here before, countless times, feeling like a spectator in my own life. I entered to find my husband's family gathered around the dining table, their faces framed by polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Janelle, my husband's sister, gave me a look that lingered longer than necessary, her lips curved in a smirk as if testing me, measuring my response. "You always wear simple things, don't you?" she said lightly, like it was a joke. I forced a polite smile, but my fingers tightened around my napkin. These little digs had been recurring patterns, subtle yet sharp, and I knew exactly how to navigate them, observe, absorb, and hold my ground without showing irritation. I could feel the room's pulse, the undercurrent of judgment beneath the laughter, and I cataloged every word and gesture silently, mentally filing away for later. Dinner started and the remarks continued, veiled in casual conversation, each sentence loaded with assumptions. When Janelle leaned over with her comment implying I married for money and contributed nothing of value, I felt a brief sting, sharper than I expected. My husband laughed along, nodding at the joke, unaware, or maybe unwilling, to see the betrayal it carried. The room treated me as invisible, tolerated out of obligation, and I could feel the quiet pressure pressing down. They always thought I was just lucky to be here, but they've never asked what I've built for myself, I thought, my stomach tightening. I nodded politely as I passed the food, my mind racing with thoughts I dared not voice aloud. Later, when I excused myself to the patio, I let the night air wash over me. The stars were faint against the Texan sky, and the sounds of the suburban neighborhood provided a distant, comforting hum. I reflected on my wedding day, on how these same faces had been cold then, congratulatory, yet distant. "Well, at least she's quiet," I remembered someone saying. The words had stung back then, and they stung now with a renewed weight. Silence had always been my armor, my way of navigating their judgment, but I began to question whether I'd mistaken grace for passivity all these years. I was no longer the woman I had been before marriage, a self-made professional with ambitions paused, dreams postponed. Something inside me shifted that evening. It wasn't anger yet, but a crack had formed. As I lingered in that reflective solitude, David, a cousin-in-law who had always hovered at the periphery of the family, approached. He didn't intrude, only leaned casually against the railing, voice low, measured. "They think they own everything, but some deals don't belong to them," he said, eyes briefly meeting mine. I frowned slightly, trying to read between the lines. My name had come up in a conversation about a major family business deal, he hinted, and I realized I was tangled in something far bigger than I had imagined. What do they know about me that I've forgotten about myself? I wondered, a chill settling along my spine. The casual dinner had turned into a subtle warning, a foreshadowing of complications I hadn't anticipated. Returning home later, the night silent around the suburban streets, I slipped into bed beside my husband, who immediately drifted into sleep. My eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling as thoughts circled relentlessly. I opened my laptop and reread an old email from a former colleague, asking if I was still consulting. A world I had set aside was calling me back, and I felt the stirrings of determination growing within. "I've been invisible too long," I whispered to myself. The mockery, the condescension, they underestimated me. They mocked what they feared, and I was beginning to recognize that fear. The morning sunlight spilled across my desk, catching the edges of scattered papers and a half-finished cup of coffee. I sat up slowly, my mind replaying the events from last night's dinner, the smiles that never reached eyes, the veiled insults, and David's cryptic warning. The quiet of my home office felt almost conspiratorial, as if the walls themselves were waiting for me to decide my next move. I stared out the window at the calm suburban street, the hum of early traffic distant, and felt a spark of determination. I'd endured their mockery for too long. Perhaps it was finally time to see the truth for myself. But there was hesitation too, a flicker of fear nudging at my resolve. I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth steady my thoughts, and resolved to act carefully, deliberately, with eyes wide open. Picking up the phone, I dialed the number of a former business partner, someone I had trusted and relied upon during my earlier career. The line rang, each tone amplifying the tension knotting in my chest. When he answered, his voice was cautious but familiar, and I carefully guided the conversation toward my husband's family business dealings. My questions were deliberate, measured, testing his willingness to share without revealing too much. He hesitated, then began dropping hints about a major $800 deal, my name surfacing in contexts I hadn't anticipated. My heart skipped a beat, not from fear alone, but from the awareness that I had been unknowingly connected to something far larger than family squabbles. Shock mingled with curiosity, and I carefully charted my responses, maintaining calm while assessing the trustworthiness of each word. By the end of the call, I had formed a tentative plan to investigate further, my determination quietly solidifying. Turning to the notebook beside my laptop, I began tracing interactions with my husband's family that hinted at control and influence over business decisions. I mapped who held sway, who was easily swayed, and who habitually underestimated me. Past discussions replayed in my mind, my contributions overlooked, dismissed, or ridiculed. Yet now, every slight became a clue, every offhand comment a piece of the puzzle. I sketched potential allies and threats, recognizing patterns I had been too polite or too cautious to see before. Knowledge is power, I reminded myself. They can't laugh at me if I understand their game. With each note, tension mounted, a careful layering of strategy that prepared me for the confrontations and revelations to come. Later that day, a distant relative, quiet and observant, stopped by under the guise of casual conversation. Their subtle encouragement caught me off guard, small nods, hints dropped about family politics, passing mentions of minor financial maneuvering that exposed cracks in the family's supposed control. For the first time, I realized I wasn't entirely alone. Others had noticed the injustices but stayed silent, and now I had both knowledge and a hint of support. Relief washed over me, tempered with renewed determination. I refined my strategy, considering how best to approach the family, when to speak, and which moves would have the most impact. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and my confidence in navigating them grew quietly but steadily. As evening approached, I sat alone in the soft glow of my desk lamp, journaling the connections between the night's events and the morning's revelations. Every insult, every cold glance, every veiled joke now felt linked to something larger, a web of influence and control I had underestimated. I reminded myself of my own value, of the skills and insight I brought to the table, separate from the family's narrow judgments. I thought about timing, plotting when and how to act for maximum effect without rash moves. A sense of cautious excitement tingled through me as I envisioned executing my plan with precision, a quiet storm brewing behind my calm exterior. The weight of invisibility was lifting, replaced by deliberate intent, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was reclaiming the narrative of my own life. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the family estate, glinting off polished wood floors and gleaming chandeliers. As I stepped onto the driveway, the grandeur of the property pressed down on me, not oppressively, but with a quiet, calculated weight. Each hedge, each marble step seemed positioned to impress, to remind me who belonged here and who did not. I walked through the front doors, my heels clicking softly, ears straining for whispers behind polite smiles. Subtle glances met mine, fleeting but sharp, measuring, judging. I catalogued them silently, Janelle with her tight-lipped smile, her eyes scanning for weakness, Uncle Victor nodding superficially, a man of influence whose favor could be bought or withheld, distant cousins muttering under their breath, almost imperceptible. My posture remained poised, my expression neutral, but inside my mind raced with strategic calculations. I was alert, recording every interaction, every subtle cue, knowing that each detail might matter in ways I couldn't yet measure. The room buzzed with small talk, polite exchanges layered with barely concealed hostility. "You must be exhausted from all your consulting work," one cousin said, the words smooth but the tone laced with doubt. I smiled faintly, acknowledging the comment, all while noting the micro-expressions, the tightened jaw, the flicker of a raised eyebrow, that betrayed their judgment. My own heart thrummed with suppressed frustration. Every laugh, every comment seemed designed to remind me of my place. But I forced myself to breathe, to remain visible yet discreet, to balance the desire to assert myself against the need for careful observation. The 800mm deal lingered in my thoughts, referenced only indirectly, but heavy in implication. My mind calculated who might help, who might betray, who underestimated me, all while outwardly maintaining the calm composure expected of a polite guest. Seated at the dinner table, I was positioned on the periphery, a silent observer at the edge of the family's carefully orchestrated world. Remarks dripped around me, about contributions I supposedly hadn't made, about my so-called inadequacies, all couched in polite phrasing that barely disguised disdain. My pulse quickened, but I restrained outward reaction, letting each slight register in my mind as data rather than insult. They underestimated me, and that underestimation was an opening. My fingers rested lightly on the tablecloth, poised, ready to translate observation into future leverage. Eye contact with certain relatives sparked subtle tension. Body language conveyed awareness without provocation. Anger simmered beneath the surface, tempered by the conscious decision to remain deliberate and patient. Each minute felt charged, a careful dance between concealment and recognition of power. During a brief recess, I stepped away to the quiet of the terrace, my ears catching a private exchange nearby, voices low, words veiled, but unmistakable in meaning. Discussions of my prior efforts being appropriated, my presence in family business maneuverings twisted by others for personal gain. Shock flared, sharp and unwelcome, but quickly focused into resolve. This wasn't a moment for confrontation, it was an intelligence-gathering opportunity. I considered how to document these revelations, to collect evidence that could later support my strategy. I mapped mental alliances, noting subtle fractures in the family's assumed control, hidden dependencies, and vulnerabilities previously invisible. Each insight sharpened my awareness, and with it, my patience. I didn't need to act immediately. Understanding the full scope was the first, most crucial step. Retreating to a quiet corner of the estate, I reflected on the whispered revelations, recalibrating my assessments of each family member, trust levels adjusted, caution elevated. I recognized psychological advantages, knowledge of secret plans, the family's habitual underestimation of me, and my own underestimated capabilities. What had begun as discomfort and anger was steadily transforming into silent resolve. I understood that the most potent response wouldn't be a rash confrontation, but measured, precise action. Each detail I observed, each subtle slight noted, was another piece of the puzzle for the moves yet to come. A quiet determination settled over me, a steady pulse of strategic patience ready to outlast their duplicity. Returning to the warm lighting of the family lounge, I reminded myself to exude calm composure while quietly observing. The murmurs and polite exchanges carried hidden agendas, each smile potentially masking a calculated intent. I scanned the room, noting who lingered near whom, who laughed a little too readily, who avoided certain eyes. Mental maps of alliances and potential threats began to form, each observation building a more complete picture of the intricate family dynamics. My restrained anger simmered beneath the surface, tempered by analytical focus. Every subtle gesture, tapped fingers, shifted gaze, hesitant laughter, offered insight into the unspoken hierarchies and power plays. I measured each interaction carefully, evaluating where influence could be leveraged without revealing my awareness and where patience would be the sharpest weapon. Comments from relatives flowed with a veneer of casual friendliness, yet the undertones were unmistakable. "You always have a unique way of seeing things," said one cousin, a compliment colored with condescension. I responded with a polite nod, storing the nuance in memory. Hidden within these exchanges were patterns of marginalization I had seen before, dismissals camouflaged as jokes, subtle reminders of my peripheral position. Yet, rather than igniting immediate frustration, these moments fueled a calculated observation. I began noting who appeared complicit in the subtle undermining and who feigned neutrality, taking careful mental snapshots of each reaction. The conversations, innocuous to some, hinted at underlying maneuvers influencing family affairs and, potentially, the 800 Mallarm deal whispered about in prior encounters. I allowed my restrained irritation to sharpen my focus, recognizing that awareness was the first step toward control. In a quiet corner, my attention caught a faint thread of conversation, revealing past undermining efforts. Projects and contributions I had made, thought to be overlooked, had been subtly appropriated by others for their advantage. Surprise flashed through me, but I tempered it immediately with deliberate internal processing. I documented the details mentally, connecting prior slighted experiences to the broader family power structure. Each small revelation became a stepping stone toward potential leverage, a way to reclaim recognition without public confrontation. Observing reactions of nearby relatives, I distinguished genuine supporters from those driven solely by self-interest. Patience and timing, I realized, would be essential. An impulsive reaction would ruin the strategic advantage I was building. Seizing moments for discreet dialogue, I engaged with select family members under the guise of casual conversation. Carefully crafted questions and attentive listening revealed inconsistencies, confirming my suspicions of manipulation and calculated exclusion. A distant cousin offered subtle hints of prior financial maneuvering, quietly signaling that I wasn't entirely alone in recognizing the injustice. Tentative alliances began to form, unspoken yet potent, and my cautious optimism grew. Emotional control was key. I allowed skepticism to guide the interactions while nurturing an intellectual confidence that only comes from measured observation. Each exchange was an opportunity to refine strategy, to mentally draft plans that could protect my personal and financial stakes while preserving outward calm. Later, retreating for a brief pause, I reaffirmed my boundaries and values, acknowledging that strategic patience would be more effective than visible retaliation. I contemplated the timing of future actions, visualizing the calculated moves necessary to shift power subtly in my favor. The quiet awareness of family vulnerabilities empowered me, converting frustration into analytical clarity. Each smile, each polite nod, and every seemingly inconsequential remark was now a thread I could pull when the moment was right. The chapter closed with a poised anticipation, an internal readiness to turn observations into decisive maneuvers when the opportunity arose. Tonight's whispers were only the beginning. I already saw the threads I could pull to turn the tables. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of the study, casting lines across my desk where papers and folders lay neatly arranged. I watched as the household began its usual rhythm, careful not to disturb the subtle equilibrium I had learned to navigate. Family members moved about with practiced smiles, but small deviations, a lingering glance, a tightened jaw, a barely audible sigh, told a different story. I cataloged each detail, mentally marking who was likely to obstruct, who might aid, and who simply observed, waiting for opportunity or chaos. My frustration simmered, restrained but persistent, blending with a cautious assertiveness that whispered I was no longer invisible. Every minor interaction became a lesson in discernment, an exercise in reading between the lines, preparing me for the moments when words and gestures would need to carry more weight than their surface appearance suggested. I tested the waters with careful, measured statements, hints of boundaries wrapped in polite conversation. It's interesting how perspectives differ on these matters, I remarked, watching faces for a flicker of guilt or defensiveness. One cousin, usually quick with a dismissive laugh, faltered slightly, adjusting posture as if reconsidering the casual contempt he had shown. Each response, each hesitation, became a small indicator of loyalty or veiled opposition. My calm exterior concealed a rising determination, an internal dialogue noting how far I could push without triggering overt conflict. I began planning indirect strategies, knowing that influence could be asserted quietly through observation and subtle guidance, rather than confrontation. I was learning to speak without speaking, to command attention while maintaining the outward appearance of courtesy. Later, I discovered a pattern I hadn't anticipated. evidence of further manipulations designed to diminish my role and undercut my influence in past family projects. A careful review of correspondence, alongside whispered recollections overheard in the hall, revealed the scope of calculated omissions and subtle distortions of my contributions. My initial surprise was quickly tempered by methodical analysis. I began formulating countermeasures, mentally rehearsing scenarios to reclaim acknowledgement without unnecessary exposure or backlash. Observing the very hands that had maneuvered against me, I recognized a pattern of deception consistent with past experiences, yet now, armed with clarity, I felt an unwavering resolve to protect my dignity while positioning for eventual redress. With this clarity, I engaged in deliberate, measured acts of quiet defiance. During minor discussions, I asserted influence gently, proposing alternatives or asking pointed questions that highlighted my competence without creating overt confrontation. Subtle shifts in the room's energy became apparent. Some family members bristled at the implicit challenge, others quietly acknowledged it, perhaps even relieved that someone was standing with clear awareness. Confidence rose steadily within me, each small success reinforcing that my presence carried weight, that my intellect could navigate around hostility without succumbing to it. I noted reactions meticulously, preparing to build upon these incremental victories as the larger familial chess game unfolded. By the end of the day, I retreated briefly to reflect, consolidating observations and mentally rehearsing future interactions. Patience and timing were essential. Each move would need to align with long-term objectives rather than fleeting emotion. I reaffirmed my values and personal boundaries, drawing on a deep well of experience and self-respect to transform frustration into calculated energy. The quiet defiance I had cultivated now felt like a force, subtle yet unmistakable, signaling that I was neither naive nor passive. The chapter closed with tension balanced on a knife's edge, anticipation of the next steps buzzing beneath calm composure. I could feel the threads of control slipping from their hands. Soon, they would see the consequences of underestimating me. The late afternoon sunlight cast a warm glow across the living room, but the serenity of the space was deceptive. Every movement, every carefully measured smile from my relatives carried weight, subtle provocations meant to test my composure. I observed the flicker of hesitation in my brother-in-law's eyes when he thought no one was looking, the faint smirk that quickly disappeared when our gaze met. Each micro-expression revealed hidden agendas, a tangle of loyalties and rivalries I had grown adept at reading over the years. Beneath my calm exterior, frustration and simmering anger coalesced into a sharp awareness. I traced patterns from the past, anticipating possible moves, planning measured responses that would preserve my dignity while positioning me strategically for moments that required assertive action. I began to respond in small, deliberate ways. A slight correction in phrasing here, a subtly elevated tone there, just enough to assert authority without igniting open conflict. I watched reactions carefully, an eyebrow raised, a brief pause, a flicker of unease, and noted each one for future reference. My satisfaction was quiet but potent, a restrained recognition of the influence I could wield through observation, timing, and subtle assertion. Each gesture, each word, became a controlled instrument to unsettle those who had underestimated me, reinforcing my growing confidence while preserving discretion. I reminded myself, influence need not be loud to be effective. Then, a discovery jolted me, a hidden layer of manipulation I hadn't anticipated. Evidence surfaced of deliberate moves designed to undermine my role, my input, and my standing within the family's sphere. Initial surprise gave way to deliberate calm as I analyzed the situation. I mapped out leverage points, noted timing for strategic interventions, and began crafting mental outlines of how to neutralize threats without appearing reactionary. Patience was key. The duplicity needed to be revealed with precision to maximize impact. Observation, reflection, and calculated readiness became my shield and weapon simultaneously. I started to push back, carefully asserting influence in low-risk scenarios that demonstrated competence and command. A well-placed question, a subtle counterpoint during discussion, each a test of boundaries and reactions. Confidence surged within me, tempered by restraint, as I gauged which family members would challenge subtly, which would attempt to minimize my influence, and which silently acknowledged my presence and authority. Evidence was gathered discreetly, every detail logged mentally for potential future use. Each small victory built momentum, planting the seeds for larger moves in the chapters to come. By evening, I withdrew briefly to consolidate observations and refine my strategic plan. Frustration had transformed into energy, a tactical readiness honed by patience and experience. Mentally, I rehearsed responses for potential confrontations, ensuring every move aligned with my long-term objectives. Boundaries, respect, and personal integrity remained paramount, and I knew the timing for escalation would be crucial. The tension in the household was palpable. I could sense the subtle cracks forming in the facades of those who believed themselves untouchable. Their underestimation of me would soon cost them, and I was ready to leverage it when the moment arrived. The anticipation thrummed quietly within, a promise of calculated confrontation and decisive action just over the horizon. The evening settled over the Houston estate with a quiet tension, soft ambient lighting casting shadows that seemed to mirror the unspoken battles simmering among the family. I watched, carefully cataloging patterns, the same manipulations I had learned to anticipate now offering clearer clues to the psychological triggers they unknowingly exposed. Each glance, every seemingly casual remark, revealed the dynamics of power and control, allowing me to map a strategy in real time. Frustration lingered beneath my composed exterior, but it was precise and calculated, fuel for the moves I was preparing to make. Every subtle misstep or overconfident smirk from a family member became a note in my mental ledger, a hint at where patience and measured action could yield the greatest advantage. I began testing the waters with carefully orchestrated interventions, subtle shifts in tone and posture designed to unsettle without overt confrontation. A softly phrased question, a pause that lingered just long enough, the slightest correction in casual conversation. Each action was intentional, calibrated to gauge reactions. Some members flinched or hesitated, revealing their susceptibility, while others remained stoic, masks carefully maintained. Inwardly, satisfaction and anticipation mingled, as I confirmed who could be swayed by subtle pressure and who might resist. My presence was becoming a quiet assertion of authority, a signal that underestimation would no longer be tolerated. Then came the revelation of deeper manipulations, layers I had not yet fully comprehended. Evidence emerged showing deliberate attempts to minimize my influence, subtly appropriating credit for contributions I had made, or undermining decisions in ways that threatened my position. Shock flashed briefly, but I quickly replaced it with calculated calm. I analyzed the new information, identified leverage points, and aligned potential responses with my long-term objectives. The miscalculations of my family, those who thought they had always controlled the narrative, were now opportunities for precise intervention. I began plotting the groundwork for assertive confrontation, ensuring that every step would maximize impact without compromising integrity. The calculated retaliation commenced with careful disclosure of select information, timing each revelation to test boundaries and assert influence. Observing reactions, I noted immediate shifts, startled glances, subtle tightening of posture, brief hesitations that confirmed the weight of my moves. Confidence surged within me, a controlled satisfaction that came not from provocation, but from the careful execution of strategy. Each action was measured to maintain dignity while demonstrating capability. I wielded timing, evidence, and precise language like tools, each word a lever shifting the room's dynamics subtly yet unmistakably. The seeds of larger escalations were planted, the family unaware that the game had turned in ways they could not yet anticipate. Retreating briefly, I reviewed outcomes, consolidating observations, and mentally rehearsing responses for potential counteractions. Focused determination replaced any lingering irritation, a quiet affirmation that the long-term plan remained intact. The balance of power felt subtly but unmistakably shifting, each move reinforcing my credibility and authority. I could sense their underestimation of me beginning to falter, the first tremors of doubt forming as my presence asserted itself through intelligence, precision, and controlled assertiveness. The stage was set for the final confrontations to come. Patience and timing would ensure that every action achieved maximum effect. I allowed a slow, deliberate smile to form, acknowledging the quiet triumph in my mind. The moment to claim my power and set things right was finally arriving. The room was tense, the warm glow of the evening lights doing little to soften the air charged with anticipation. I had spent hours consolidating evidence, cross-referencing statements, and mentally rehearsing the sequence of revelations. Every observation, every subtle inconsistency collected over months now became a tool for strategic impact. I knew exactly who needed to witness the exposure, who would falter, and who might attempt to manipulate the narrative to their advantage. Calmly, I laid out the documents, timing each revelation with careful precision, a controlled anger simmering beneath my composed exterior. The stakes were high, every piece of information delivered with deliberate care, ensuring the consequences would be unmistakable and immediate. As I began the confrontation, I observed reactions with laser focus. Every flinch, hesitation, or forced smile confirmed the power of my approach. I presented selective facts and discrepancies in family statements, maintaining a calm assertiveness that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Eyes widened, subtle shifts in posture betrayed discomfort, and whispered glances revealed the first cracks in their carefully constructed facades. I guided the narrative, ensuring each point built toward the inevitable, dramatic reveal. The room, previously confident in its control, became a stage for scrutiny and reflection under my measured scrutiny. Then came the unveiling of hidden betrayals. I disclosed secret agreements, manipulated records, and covert maneuvers designed to undermine me. For a moment, I felt a brief flicker of shock at the depths of duplicity, but it quickly transformed into calculated resolve. Family members shifted uncomfortably, guilt and vulnerability painting their expressions in ways they could not suppress. I systematically presented documentation and logic, letting the evidence speak, emphasizing the hypocrisy and abuse of power I had endured. Each revelation tightened the tension, setting the stage for decisive moves that would secure both justice and authority. The final act involved ensuring the exposure reached the eyes and ears of key witnesses, family members who had remained silent, external observers who could validate the truth. I used deliberate gestures, verbal emphasis, and visual evidence to reinforce my authority, each action carefully designed to elicit recognition without seeming vindictive. I watched as the impact settled in, noting subtle changes in demeanor, the flicker of acknowledgement, and the first signs of respect earned through strategic precision. Confidence surged within me, a controlled satisfaction that the manipulation and lies could no longer hold sway. I had established an unassailable position while maintaining my integrity, readying the ground for the closure that would follow. Alone for a moment, I reflected on the growth and resilience that had brought me here. Relief mingled with pride, tempered by cautious awareness that the final chapter was yet to come. The immediate victory was tangible, yet I knew the need for vigilance remained. Mentally, I prepared for any remaining reactions, ensuring every action, every revelation, and every subtle cue had been accounted for. The family could no longer deny the truth, and as I stepped back, a sense of controlled triumph settled over me. The reckoning was near, and I was ready to see it through to its conclusion. The morning light filtered gently through the blinds, casting long, quiet shadows across the Houston estate. I moved through the rooms with a calm purpose, observing the aftermath of the previous night's revelations. The air felt lighter, though tension lingered in the corners of the house. Faces that had once carried smugness now wore traces of discomfort or reluctant respect. I took stock quietly, acknowledging the consequences that had already rippled through the family, the legal clarifications, and the subtle social shifts that affirmed my authority. Gratitude warmed me for the allies who had supported me, their encouragement quiet yet essential, and I allowed myself a private moment of satisfaction, tempered by reflection. The sense of empowerment was real, but tempered by the awareness that vigilance remained necessary. Later, in my private retreat, I reflected on the journey I had traversed. The months of careful observation, strategic patience, and quiet defiance had shaped a strength I hadn't fully recognized in myself before. Vulnerability lingered in the memory of every slight endured, yet it no longer dictated my actions. I considered the lessons learned, the importance of discerning intentions, and the value of self-worth anchored in principle. Gratitude blended with clarity. I understood how past sacrifices had forged resilience and insight. There was healing in acknowledgement, and a calm determination in knowing that my future choices would be informed by both experience and integrity. The final steps involved securing justice and formal recognition. I ensured rightful ownership, acknowledgement, and redress were documented and observed by appropriate witnesses. The family members whose actions had been malicious faced consequences proportionate to their transgressions. I presented the outcomes with composed authority, letting facts and documentation speak on my behalf. There was triumph in measured silence, a satisfaction that justice aligned with moral standards rather than personal vindictiveness. External observers, friends, colleagues, and those quietly invested witnessed closure, reinforcing the legitimacy of the actions taken. I maintained control, integrity intact, and confirmed that the resolution would stand firm even beyond the estate's walls. Attention then turned to rebuilding relationships where possible and setting firm boundaries where needed. I engaged selectively with family members, offering cautious reconciliation to those willing to respect my autonomy and values. Emotional layering was delicate. Hope, tempered by awareness, allowed for meaningful dialogue without surrendering authority. I shared insights with younger or overlooked family members, modeling resilience and thoughtful assertiveness. Self-respect remained non-negotiable, and the lessons of the past informed the limits I set moving forward. Each conversation, each measured interaction reinforced my confidence and emotional stability, preparing me for life beyond lingering resentment. As the day drew toward evening, I paused to consider the journey from silence and caution to empowerment and assertive clarity. I embraced optimism balanced with realism, recognizing the lingering vulnerabilities inherent to human experience. Lessons of self-worth, strategic patience, and critical thinking had been indelibly marked on my life. Though the immediate conflicts were resolved, the memory of past deceptions remained a quiet teacher. I felt readiness for what lay ahead, an open-ended horizon for personal growth, and the assurance that I could navigate future challenges with intelligence, strength, and integrity. Though justice has been served, the echoes of the past remain, reminding me to stay vigilant and true to myself.